She left at 36, and I didn't understand why until I was an old man sitting alone with a phone I barely knew how to use. I'm an elderly man now, 78 years old, and I still remember the way my hands shook when I first read his message. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary, too ordinary for something that carried so much regret inside it. This story was sent by a man who asked me not to use his real name. He said, just tell it like it is. Maybe someone else will understand it earlier than I did. He was talking about a woman who left him when they were both 36 years old, and he said something I can't forget. I thought she left because she stopped loving me. I was wrong. She left because I stopped noticing her while she was still trying to stay. When I first read that, I paused, because I've heard a lot of confessions over the years, but that one felt slow, heavy, like it had been waiting 30 years to be spoken. He met her when they were young, early 20s, the kind of age where nothing feels permanent, but everything feels like it will last forever anyway. He said she wasn't loud, not dramatic, not the kind of woman who walked into a room and demanded attention. She was steady, quietly warm, the kind of person who remembered small things that other people forgot. What she liked in her tea, which days he came home tired, when he hadn't slept well. At the time, he didn't think that meant much. He thought that was just how relationships worked. That's something he wrote to me more than once. I thought love was supposed to stay on its own. They got married in their late 20s, had 2 children, bought a small house that always needed something fixed. Life, as he described it, didn't fall apart. It just filled up. Bills, work, school runs, family obligations, deadlines, and somewhere in all of that noise, he stopped looking at her properly. Not in a cruel way, not in a dramatic way, in the most dangerous way possible, in a quiet way. He said there were moments he still remembers now. Years later, like fragments of glass, she would stand in the kitchen at night, waiting for him to finish working. He would say, just a minute, and mean it, but that minute became an hour, then 2, then a pattern. She stopped asking after a while. That's the part he says he didn't notice at first. Not that she was asking less, but that she stopped needing to ask at all. I remember him writing, I thought it meant she was understanding. Now I think it meant she was leaving before she physically left. At 36, she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't have another man waiting. There was no dramatic betrayal like people expect when relationships end. She simply said she was tired, and she wanted to leave. He said he laughed at first, not because it was funny, because he genuinely didn't believe her. He thought she meant a weekend away, or a break, or one of those emotional storms that passed like weather. But she wasn't storming, she was finished. And that was the moment he didn't understand at all, because in his mind, nothing big enough had happened for her to leave. But she didn't leave because of one moment. She left because of thousands of small ones he never thought mattered. He told me something that stuck with me longer than anything else. She didn't leave when I stopped loving her. She left when she realized I had stopped seeing her. When she packed, it wasn't chaotic. There was no shouting, no breaking plates, no final argument that could be replayed and blamed. She folded clothes, carefully, like she didn't want to leave damage behind. The children were still small then, old enough to notice, not old enough to understand. He said he stood in the hallway watching her, expecting her to stop, to hesitate, to turn around, but she didn't. And he said the strangest part was how calm she looked. Not cold, just decided. I asked him in his message, Because I always ask this when someone tells me a story like this. Did you try to stop her? He replied, I asked her what I did wrong, and she said something he didn't understand at the time. You didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped being here while still being here. That sentence followed him for 30 years. At first he said he dismissed it. People do that when they don't want to face something too uncomfortable. They turn it into confusion instead of truth. He told himself she was being emotional, that she would come back. That time would fix it. But she didn't come back. Time didn't fix it. It only moved forward without her. The slow cost of it didn't hit him immediately. That's the part he wanted me to make sure I said properly. Because people imagine heartbreak as something sharp, something immediate, something you can point to. But this wasn't that. This was slow erosion. Years passed. He raised the children mostly alone, worked more, talked less, went through life in a kind of functional silence. He remarried briefly in his late 40s, but it didn't last. He said it never really had a chance because he was still living in the shadow of something he never fully understood. He didn't talk about her, not really, not until he got older and the noise of life started fading. That's when memory gets louder. He told me there was a turning point, though it didn't feel like one at the time. It was a phone call, one of his children calling to tell him she was ill. Not his ex-wife at first, someone else, a family situation. But it brought him back into contact with her indirectly, through documents, through shared responsibility, through the strange bureaucracy that still connects people long after they've emotionally separated. And eventually he saw her again, not often, just briefly. And what shocked him wasn't sadness. It was how ordinary she looked, like nothing dramatic had ever happened, like she had survived the ending of their life together and simply continued her own. He said that moment broke something in him more than the actual divorce ever did, because he realized she hadn't fallen apart. He had. Just slowly enough that he didn't notice. And then came the real turning point. She passed away when she was in her 60s. Nothing sudden, just illness. The kind of slow decline life sometimes brings without warning, but with certainty. He wasn't there at the end. He didn't even know how to feel about that at first. But he went to the funeral, and that's where he said everything he had avoided for decades finally caught up to him. People spoke about her differently than he expected. They didn't speak about her leaving him. They spoke about her kindness, her patience, her way of listening without interrupting, her ability to make people feel understood without saying much at all. And he sat there realizing something that made him feel physically sick. The version of her he had forgotten to appreciate was the version everyone else had always seen clearly. After the funeral, he said he went home and sat in silence for hours, not crying at first, just thinking. And then he said the real understanding came, not like a revelation, but like something heavy finally sinking all the way down. She didn't leave because she stopped loving me, he wrote again in his later message. She left because she couldn't stay in a place where she was slowly disappearing. That's what he finally understood at 66. 30 years too late. He told me there is no dramatic lesson at the end of this. No sudden wisdom that fixes anything. Only clarity that arrives after it can no longer change anything. What can't be fixed, he said, is not just the relationship, it's the time. The ordinary days that were never noticed while they were happening. The small conversations that never happened because later always felt available. The quiet presence of someone who slowly stopped trying to be seen. He asked me to say something directly to people listening. Not as advice, just as truth from someone who has lived long enough to recognize patterns. He said, if someone is still trying to reach you in small ways, don't wait for them to start shouting before you listen. because by the time people shout, he said, they are often already halfway gone. And then he paused in his message and added something softer. I thought love ended when someone leaves, but I learnt it can end long before that, when you stop paying attention and don't even realize you've stopped. Now, sitting here at 78, I think about how many stories like his are out there. Not loud ones, quiet ones, where nothing big happens, but everything changes anyway. He doesn't ask for forgiveness anymore. That part of him is gone. What remains is something more subdued, acceptance mixed with a kind of permanent echo. He ended his message with one line I still think about when I read these stories for the channel. I finally understood her truth, but I had to live half my life without her to see it. And maybe that's the part that stays with me the most. Not the leaving, not the ending, but the years it took to understand what was already quietly written in the life they were living together. Sometimes we don't lose people in one moment. We lose them in pieces so small we don't notice until the whole shape of their absence is already complete.